Welcome to Rates and Barrels, everybody. I'm Al Melchior. I am here with Eno Saris, and it being spring training, and I suppose I could just say it being baseball, we do have a lot of injury news. We will be getting to that shortly. We're also going to take a look at some spring training stats and try to figure out what's maybe relevant and what's not, because it's spring training. So we do have to be careful about these stats, but there's some interesting ones. So we're going to consider those in a little bit. So before we dig into all that, just a reminder that if you have not yet subscribed to The Athletic, now's a great time. You can get in the door at $2 a month. Just go to theathletic.com/rates and barrels. All the draft kit material is there. There's more to come from both me and Eno and everybody else, of course, at The Athletic. So check that out. And Eno, I know it's, again, sort of a broken record. I know we've done some previous episodes on spring training injury updates, and this isn't going to be the last one either. But let's start by talking about the big news from Wednesday night. Edwin Díaz in the World Baseball Championship game, Puerto Rico, with the big win over the Dominican Republic. But Díaz in the post-game celebration injured his knee and looks bad. I have not seen anything as of this.
I mean, you can't put pressure on it. You can't walk off. It's bad. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So he is slated to get tests on Thursday, which is right now when we're recording this. So I've not seen anything yet, but operating in this, somewhat of an information void.
You know what? One thing though, there's been a lot of diaper filling about this, and some like really prominent media people calling for the end of the WBC because of this. And I think that would just be a real shame. I mean, just watching these games, it's really interesting to me too, because one personality made a reference to where their grandmothers got laid, as that's the only reason why people are playing in these certain for these certain teams. But I kind of think that some of these teams have really had their own personalities, and they sort of seem to come from their cultures a little bit, it was very different watching Dominican Republic against Puerto Rico last night than it was watching, Canada play Mexico or, Israel. And, so I really thought that there was some kind of cool, like different ways the teams were celebrating and the different ways the teams showed their pride. And I think that there is really kind of cool. It is a little bit like some cultural personalities coming through, some countries' personalities coming through. And then everybody seems to really care about it. Like everyone is really into it and is really having a good time. And if the players are having such a good time, maybe that should be a clue to us that this is a fun thing that should continue. And we shouldn't call for an end just because someone got injured. We've had injuries with tanning beds. I think Chad Matola's career was almost ended by a tanning bed. We've got massage situations with Carlos Correa. We've got we've had shirt things. Are we going to ban shirts? We've had people, James Kaprielian hurt himself putting on a shirt. Zach Plesac hurt himself putting on a shirt. I mean, if we're banning shirts for baseball players, I think we could probably get some people on board, but the general population's not going to get behind that. So I think that some of this stuff is overboard. And really my general takeaway from the WBC has been, this is fun. Trout is out here saying this is just a ton of fun and really fun. And he was saying to other players, if you're sitting here watching this at home, he's probably talking to the American pitchers who aren't there, because America might be in a little bit better spot if it had some better pitching. But they've got a great lineup. They'll slug their way through it. And I think the favorites probably Japan, America, Puerto Rico's looking pretty good. Venezuela's looking pretty good. That's my top four. But it's just been really fun to watch, and I think this is just it's unfortunate. We've had celebration injuries in regular baseball. We've had injuries. What was it? Clint Barmes had some deer meat.
Trying to lug deer meat up a staircase.
Life happens, man.
That's right. That's not a thing that happens, very often. That one especially. No, I had the same reaction, like Kendrys Morales, and that was. Now, was that? I'm trying to remember if that was. I think it was a playoff game, wasn't that?
I think the pushback would be that he was celebrating a playoff game, so that's a more meaningful game, and this was celebrating a WBC game. But
how often does it happen though in any situation? Not
Right.
very.
It doesn't have that often. And also, you're putting a lot of your own value system on whether this game is meaningless. You know what I mean? Like,
True.
if Edwin Díaz was celebrating like that, the game was not meaningless to him. You know what I mean? So, I don't know. I feel like this game was meaningful to the players that were in it, and it's just an unfortunate thing that happened.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, I hate to, elevate the statements like the one that you referred to, because to me, it's just so patently ridiculous and even offensive. But,
Yeah.
you know, yeah, I mean, it clearly is meaningful to the players. It's fun to watch, and this sort of thing. It's such an overreaction because this sort of injury just happens so rarely.
Yeah, yeah. So, it's funny too, as fantasy guys, like you can't help that part of your brain. Like the thing happens and you're like, I wonder who's going to close for the Mets this year.
It is the most awkward segue to make in our line of work.
So bad. And I was in a slow draft at the time that it happened, and I immediately clicked over to slow draft to see how many picks till mine, and I was like, 10 picks. Nope, I'm not getting either of them. So, I mean, I think the main contenders for this are pretty obviously David Robertson and Adam Ottavino. And the pitching projections that we've got that use Stuff Plus actually like Ottavino by a third of a run. You got like a 3.26 ERA in this, and a 28% strikeout rate, and Robertson is projected for a 3. Oh, there he is, 3.3. Actually, it's a virtual tie, 3.3 to a 3.26, and Robertson actually has a 29.9% strikeout rate, projected strikeout rate. So I'm glad I checked my work on that one, because earlier I looked and it said 3.5. I must have been looking at a different Robertson, because my inclination, my gut feel is actually Robertson.
And my gut feel is that this is going to be a tough situation. I mean, in part right now because we don't know how long Diaz will be out, but also it strikes me as a situation. It's a bullpen that has some depth. Brooks Raley in the Rays situation, of course, that's everybody gets saves there. I mean, not literally, but he got I think half a dozen last year, and he's a skilled reliever. He's hurt right now, but shouldn't be out for too long. And Drew Smith, so I could see this going a number of ways. I don't know that Robertson or Ottavino would necessarily get a large enough share that it would have been a good move to make that pick, even if you could have.
I don't know. It's only been 10 pitches, so it's a very small sample, but the stuff has been good on Robertson in a virtual tie with Pete Fairbanks. He's closed in the past. And I think they'll probably be looking for, a one-person solution, especially since, yes, there was some good depth. But in terms of like sort of standout guys, I think it still is Ottavino and Robertson, and I think you want Ottavino to be your setup guy in this situation. So I think that would be where I would put my ducats.
All right. Well, let's see where you put.
But I mean,
yeah.
If you're saying that like David Robertson doesn't necessarily rise to like first or second tier, yes, I'd still think he's probably a third or fourth tier closer. But
okay, well, if we convert that into like RP1, RP2 for let's say 15 teamers, would you feel all right about going after Robertson for RP2?
Yeah, I think so. But I'd feel better if I got him as a 3.
Fair enough.
Probably some leagues drafting as if that thing happened. I just click. Robertson, fourth reliever.
Well, let's look a little bit more macro at this, because Diaz was, and rightfully so, considered the top reliever fantasy wise. And I think you and I have talked about this at least once or twice so far this spring, that there's been this trend the last couple of years of going very, very early on closers. And now one of the big names is gonna fall a lot. So would that change the way that you approach saves in upcoming drafts? And I could see this going at least two different ways. That you could say, well, there's a thinning at the top, so might as well wait. Or, more, well, Diaz is gone and maybe there's more interchangeability once you get past Diaz. So, how do you see this?
Well, it definitely impacts the supply. And so we've got less supply. That's there's nothing you can argue about with that. How you react to a thinning in the supply is also what you alluded to.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
that just because there's a thing in supply doesn't mean you have to panic. I had a top tier of 6 that ended with Presley, but there's a lot of people, and the market has Hader and maybe even Devin Williams in there as a top 8. And I'm trying to avoid Hader and Williams. Hader because of the hair up his nose, the command that was so bad last year. I would hate to see that come back. And Devin Williams is an injury risk for me. But if you can include those, you still have 7 elite pitchers, elite relievers, and I think in most drafts, I am still trying to get one of those, just one of the cheapest ones. And the reason I'm trying to get one of the cheapest ones is just what happened to Edwin Díaz. Also, just the fickle nature of the closer's role. There are pitchers like Josh Hader who go in and out of it. People dropped Josh Hader last year. Like it's the one role where there's a stat you've got that just can be completely eradicated, that people are drafting you for, that can be completely eradicated in one decision by a manager. Like, yes, there are kind of Miles Straw types that are a lot better at the top of the at the top of the lineup. And if the manager says, okay, now you're the 8th hitter, that will deflate their value. But it's not like taking you out of the closer's role. Like,
right.
You know what I mean? That's like, you go from, I'm happy about having this guy on my team to I'm going to drop him next week, and I just think that's way too fickle of a thing. But, yes, elite closers do have better outcomes than the lower end closers. And so I generally try to get one of them. Yeah, with this, there's just one less. And so I might be likely to extend my elite 6 to include Hader to sort of replace Diaz. But I still see 6. And 6 means, you just have to beat half your league. You just have to get to, you just got to get one of those. And so I'm also now considering other strategies that I hadn't before of just saying, the pitching plus model does really well with relievers. Why don't I just get some middle guys? I will get so much value. Like, just imagine, usually you're taking, in order to get one of these elite closers, you're usually taking them in the top 4 rounds or something.
Yeah.
Right? It has to be the top 4 rounds. Just imagine, instead of taking that elite closer, let's say you started with Woodruff in the 2nd or 3rd, and you double tapped. And by my rankings, in the 4th, where am I? I've got so many tabs open. Where? Let me find it. But let's say who might be available in the 4th instead of a closer, if you've got an ADP or a recent draft open.
And that would be a good idea, wouldn't it?
Where is my rankings? Are they gone?
Yeah, well, I think like Kyle Schwarber is somebody I think I've taken.
No, I was thinking starting pitcher.
Oh, starting pitcher. Okay, I thought you were talking about a different position.
But yeah, but I think just to keep it within pitching, like you could take an elite closer, or you could double tap Woodruff with maybe Shane McClanahan. What do I have? I have Max Scherzer.
I was gonna say Scherzer, Zach Wheeler,
or Luis Castillo.
Yeah.
You know the difference between Luis Castillo and a closer? You're talking about like 130 innings, And I've got him projected for a 3.12 ERA. Yes, closers probably start with a 2, but I don't know, man. Like, I think Luis Castillo is worth more than a closer.
I would too. And I mean, this is why
in a vacuum.
Yeah. I mean, to answer my own question, I mean, it changes nothing for me because for at least the last couple of years, if not longer, I'm not taking any reliever earlier than like the 10th or 11th one that's off the board. Because they're just going way too early. And you address the whole issue of the risk. I mean, there's just way too much volatility for somebody like that, as opposed to, and I'll make the move to a different position, to a Kyle Schwarber, for example.
Right. who you're just the volatility there is like, will he hit 210? Will he hit 250?
Right.
The volatility is not, will he hit me 35 dongs or not?
Exactly. Well, let's go from
And could the manager do something, change something about his role where he would not hit me 35 dongs? I mean, you're not sitting Kyle Schwarber, you know?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. So yeah, a whole element of risk that's not there for a lot of players. So yeah, let's go from what has generally been perceived as the best closer situation to one of the worst, and that is the Diamondbacks. But there is some relevant news there. Mark Melancon not likely to be active for the start of the season, dealing with the right shoulder injury. So likely starting the year on the IL. So, but kind of a similar type of question, in that you have multiple candidates in a bullpen there. I know this is one I've not been excited about. I don't think you've been excited about it, but at least with one person out of the mix, does that make it at all more enticing to try to focus in on one, just like you were doing with the Mets bullpen now?
It's just a little hard to figure out who is any good in that pen. It's not very good. However, Justin Martinez has raised my eyebrows, and he's got a 111 stuff plus this spring. That's the best in that pen. McGough was a DVR favorite, and I think he has above average stuff and good locations, and looks like a solid reliever. But Martinez has the kind of turn your head, triple digits, closer stuff. This team, I think, is approaching respectability. That is so mean, and I know how that sounds. But come on, if you're an Arizona fan, you know what I mean. Like it hasn't been that fun. Yeah, that could be meaner than that. I think this team is approaching respectability, and I don't think they'll necessarily play games with keeping Justin Martinez cheap. One thing is do they want him as a fireman in the 7th or 8th, and McGough just gets the final 3 batters? That's a possibility. But if you're asking me to bet on the best reliever in this pen, I think it's Justin Martinez, and I think he's a little bit more interesting now.
Do you think Andrew Chafin figures into a big piece of that puzzle, given that there are other lefties in the pen?
Yeah, Chafin has never been a high stuff guy. Right now he's got a 94 stuff plus. He's not locating well according to Location Plus. It's a 67 pitch sample, so it's not even that tiny of a sample. He's actually had good appearances. The managers use lefty closers half as much as you'd expect, given the number of lefties in baseball. Mm-hmm. You're right. That might have something to do with, do they have another lefty and they need that lefty for situational stuff? But the only things that I've found that are sort of predictive with closing is usually velo and strikeout rate. So that's why I picked Robertson in the last one, because stuff aside, he had the better projected strikeout rate. And in this case, I'm going to pick Justin Martinez because of the velo mostly, and the stuff, which would suggest a higher strikeout rate.
All righty. Well, again, like I said, not a bullpen that probably many people are going to be excited about, but thought it was worth going back to it since that situation has changed. Well, let's get to just a whole bunch of pitcher injury updates. We've actually got one hitter update. We'll get to that. We'll lump the pitchers together. There's just a whole bunch of stuff here. Tony Gonsolin is throwing out to 120 feet and able to put some weight on his sprained left ankle, per Dave Roberts. That comes from a tweet from the Athletics' Fabian Ardaya. Still no update on Gonsolin's timetable. So is he a worthwhile risk with upside, or are you just scared off by this injury situation?
He's at the nexus of these shift rules. He's maybe the biggest benefit of the shift last year, Tony Gonsolin, and so I was a little bit out on him. My model does not like him. On top of that, and so I wasn't going to buy any shares. I don't have a do not draft, but I wasn't going to buy any shares unless he dropped. And there just seemed to be a lot of people who were really into Tony Gonsolin, so I was going to let them have him. This also just makes it hard. I guess this sounds like he might pitch sometime early in the regular season. And that's actually good because at least you're not buying someone where you have to sit him on your bench the first couple of weeks. So I would consider good news.
Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree. That was the way I was reading it as well. And the ADP is, I mean, it's fairly risk free, especially if you're talking about a 12-team league. NFBC, it's a 177 ADP. So I don't know. I think
That's one little flaw with ADP is just the fickle nature of it, right?
Yeah.
It's 177 when you have to think I won't have him for opening week, and so then I have to sit him. So then he's dropping because he's an injured pitcher, and I don't want to pick. I'm not picking an injured pitcher who's currently injured. Now with this news, he's not necessarily currently. He's just throwing. And that's why I got Zach Wheeler in like the 5th or something for my main event last year, was because he was hurt, but I'd seen he'd just thrown a bullpen. So, ADP was flagging and he dropped in our league because people thought of him as hurt. And I thought of him as maybe missing his first turn. If that, he didn't even miss his first turn. So that's how I see Gonsolin, is like this ADP is going to change. And if you are looking at his ADP right now, don't take it as, written in pen.
Well, that's a really good point, because I'm looking at who's above him in NFBC. Right above him is Drew Rasmussen. I mean, there's no way, even with good news, that I'm taking Gonsolin ahead of him. Jeffrey Springs, Pablo Lopez, Jordan Montgomery, Charlie Morton. So, yeah, there's not a lot of room, if any room, really, for Gonsolin to move up.
I think he's hanging out there. I think it's where he should be.
Yeah, exactly. So, excellent point there. All right. Garrett Whitlock. He made his spring training debut through a couple of innings, looked good, coming back from hip surgery that he had in September. What are your expectations for Whitlock now that he's pitching in games?
Yeah, I saw that. It was 2 innings.
Yeah.
2 1/3. That's a really interesting number because it's a little one I would have thought in a debut. I mean, there's a lot of guys who debut in spring with 1, right?
Right.
And so he's trying to catch up a little bit, I think, to other guys that are pitching for rotation spots.
Mm-hmm.
I really like him, and I think he can be a starting pitcher, and I think the Red Sox sort of need him, especially with Paxton already going down with injury. He's got an injured hamstring, so where's Paxton going to come back? Is he going to come back with 2 innings? If he comes back with 2 innings, it's going to be a race to see who's ready first. And Brian Bayo has options.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's scheduled to throw 2 innings of his own yesterday, it looks like. So they're all kind of stuck at 2 innings. They're all sort of in the battle. I would say those 3 are in a battle for 2 spots. How matters, Cutter Crawford has an option. I would assume that the guys with options go down, because this is a team that does not want to release anyone, right? This is a team that wants to, any team run by Chaim Bloom wants to hold on to their assets as long as possible. So I would assume actually that Bayo goes down, and Whitlock does have options, but I do think he's the best pitcher of the sort of Bayo, Howe, Cutter, Crawford group. So I think the opening day rotation is Pivetta, Kluber, Sale, Paxton, and Whitlock. And that makes Whitlock a good pick near the end of your drafts.
Okay, interesting. So how not making that cut?
There's something about his pitch mix that kind of goes relieverish to me. I know that it looks very Salian from the right side, but he just has fairly large platoon splits that I think are supported by the types of pitches he throws. Now, if he's going to throw the splitter a lot, maybe that'll change his outcomes. But I want to see something here. Splitter is he allowed a 338 WOBA against lefties last year and a 230 against righties. That's an aggressive platoon split. We're talking about a 400 slugging to lefties and a 220 slugging to righties. And that sort of thing is just kind of hard to get by. You can have teams load their lineups as lefties, and it's something that people say about slots like that.
Yeah. No, that's
slots like it has.
Yeah, no, definitely a vulnerability. Well, let's talk a little bit about Ranger Suárez. And I drafted him, with you in mind. If you're wondering why that's the case, we had a conversation, I want to say maybe 2-3 weeks ago on the show, and you were talking about Kyle Gibson as kind of a type of pitcher that you want to target towards the end of the draft, for safety.
One
And
of
I
the
decided
few late innings guys.
exactly. So I decided, you know what, I like Ranger Suárez as that type of pitcher, and
Oh,
as happens, in spring training, we were just talking about this before we started recording.
thanks,
Took him, and then I think it was the next day, or maybe even later the same day, the reports came out about the forearm issue. So dealing with some tenderness there. Did play catch on Wednesday, is expected to move on to long toss on Thursday. Still a chance that Suárez could be ready for the first week of the season, but that being a forearm injury really, really worries me. I've shied away since then. I imagine I will in my remaining drafts. So is that overly cautious?
They are having a heck of a time in that camp. Let's see. I think Christopher Sanchez was shut down with left tricep soreness. Andrew Painter, we don't know yet. Maybe UCL surgery, maybe rest and rehab. We'll see on that one. I thought there was a little bit more bad news, but in any case, those two alone were going to be the 5 and 6.
Mm-hmm.
And so now Bailey Falter is the 5, and I don't know who the 6 is. So this is getting a little bit hairy in Philadelphia. They also, I think, are missing their number 2 catcher, Garrett Stubbs, and their number 3 catcher, Rafael Marchand. So things are not hunky-dory there unless Scott Kingery can catch. The solution, I don't know what it is. I would hold Suárez a little bit longer. We're not playing games yet. We're not playing fantasy yet. So, it's just a question of waiting longer. I'm not drafting too many shares of Suárez. But sometimes he drops a little bit further than he should, because he does seem like a credible major league starter that should have like maybe a high 3s ERA and get some wins. It's a tough park, but get some wins.
Keeps the ball down though.
Yeah, that's true. Good ground ball rate. And I would just hold in terms of drafting him. I might hold off on drafting him right now.
Yeah, no, I have been.
And your forearm is like, next news might be TJ. So
yeah, that is my worry. And I was wondering about that, that pecking order, 6th, 7th starters. So you had the same reaction that I did. But I want to talk about Falter a little bit more because, I think this does solidify his position in the rotation more. But is that enough to make him trustworthy as like an end game target?
He's a low stuff guy that has good command of a fair amount of pitches. My model says it's a 4.66 ERA though, with that park. He has a pretty extreme over the top release point though. I do think my model captures that sort of stuff, but it's possible it doesn't. So he's got some deception to him that maybe my model doesn't get. If you love Bailey Falter, then take him as your last pitcher in a 20-team league. I feel like that's the nicest.
You're being mean again.
I'm being mean again. But then, I told Falter something. I was like, "Oh, my model says your changeup is the best pitch," and he goes, "It's my worst pitch, and I hate it." So, wow. He's wide-eyed about, he's open-eyed about his own talent level. I don't think he would tell you he's the best pitcher in the major leagues or anything. So that park is tough, man. I don't think I really want to buy into that park unless it's Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler on the top end.
Yeah, well, that was part of what I liked about Suárez pre-injury, because I do trust him to avoid the home run. Mm-hmm. Even though he's not a huge whiffs guy or anything. So, let's go on to the Mets. This is not really an information void here. We know that José Quintana is going to miss at least half of the season. He's having rib surgery on Friday.
Kind of gruesome. They thought it was cancer, and then they said it's not cancer, but he still needs to have like a bone graft. I don't know. Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah, no, it really is.
I know who I want though.
Well, and I think I know who you want too. And but go ahead, lay it on us.
I'm all in on Tyler McGill. I got a 3.67 ERA for him and 26% strikeout rate with a projected 104 stuff. Peterson, I have with a 4 ERA and a 24% strikeout rate and 92 stuff plus, projected stuff plus. So McGill's also been looking good this spring. I think that he's always, which is the right one? The Tyler is the Met.
Correct. Now you're getting me.
Actually, that's interesting. They're about equal this spring. But that's 123 pitches from Peterson and 94 from McGill. So I'm going to rely on last year's numbers a little bit to separate them.
Okay. And when do you feel like it's appropriate to get them in the queue?
I have them around the interesting sixth pitchers and ahead of the less interesting fifth pitchers. So, for example, I have McGill around 108, Bailey Ober, 107, Nick Pivetta, right in there. And I have them ahead of fifth starting pitchers I don't like as much, like Michael Lorenzen or Yusei Kikuchi or Cole Irvin types, Paul Blackburn types, just because I think McGill might be the type that you can play all the time. Whereas with Lorenzen and Blackburn, I would want to only play them at home. So that, especially in 12 teamers, that's streaming, and in 15 teamers, that's the kind of guy where you have to up and down and maybe drop him, maybe pick him up, maybe streamer. Whereas I feel like McGill is a little bit more like maybe I'm starting him 75% of the time.
All right. Well, bad news for the Nationals and especially for Cade Cavalli, Tommy John surgery for him. So that's that's a disappointing thing because he appeared to be a lock for that rotation. A lot of promise there. Is there anybody left in the Nationals rotation who interests you at this point? Now I'm being mean.
Yeah. Wow, this is a mean podcast. I've never been in on Josiah Gray. I want to check in on his spring if I've got it. Same situation. 95 stuff plus. Not many pitches in the sample. It's just a bad fastball, and I'm waiting on him. He has to change the fastball shape. And what I'm thinking about pitching development is that if there's something immutable, I think, and unchangeable and uncoachable, the two things that I think might be it are fastball shape and command. And now, of course, everything you can shave around the edges. You can do this, you can do that. I think you could change your fastball. You could say, okay, we're going to go with a cutter. We're going to go with a cut fastball. We're going to go with a sinker. You can change it. But in terms of really hey, this guy added 3 inches of ride to his four-seamer, I don't think that happens. I don't think it happens ever. And if it does happen, I think it's very limited sample. And so Josiah Gray just has a bit of a dead zone fastball, and he has 2 good breaking balls. I don't know. Maybe he can do a cutter. Maybe he can do a sinker. Maybe he can change his fastball type. I don't trust the Nationals to find that right now. So that's why I have been out on him. And then I like some of what Gore has. Mackenzie Gore actually has a good fastball shape. The problem right now is that his pitches are just not really there. Let me see if I've got that open, but I've got a 93 stuff plus this spring. That's been something that's popped up in the past. Here's per pitch, Mackenzie Gore. Let's see here, Mackenzie Gore, 4-seam fastball, 99 stuff plus. It's been as high as 105 in the past. That's actually pretty good for a 4-seam fastball. Then we've got curveball, 81 stuff plus. Change up 69.8, 69, not nice. And then slider 97 stuff plus, and it's not easy to have slider be under 100 sometimes. So for him, I'm actually, I'm still actually into him long term, and there could be some disruption that makes him good this year. You know what I mean? Like he just, something where he throws his slider harder, or he changes shape, or he decides to go with a cutter instead of a slider, goes with the gyro. Somebody teaches him the sweeper. Again, I don't necessarily trust the Nationals to do that, but he also has, I'm sure, advisors privately. A lab he goes to, pitching lab he goes to. So maybe I like Gore better for next year after an off season, or if I see him change his pitch mix during the season, I might jump on him. But that's about it. That's the best I can do. The best I can do is you're looking for Josiah Gray to throw a different kind of fastball he's throwing, and for Mackenzie Gore to change his secondary mixes. Otherwise, I'm still pretty much hands off on them.
Yeah, not a whole lot there. So, like I said, a whole lot of pitching news. I've just got sort of a cluster of hitter news all on the Yankees. So Harrison Bader is expected to miss 6 weeks with an oblique strain. And Isaiah Kiner-Falefa is expected to get some starts in center field this coming weekend and be sort of a super utility player. And that might not sound like a big deal, but he was at least nominally in that shortstop competition with Oswald Peraza and Anthony Volpe. Of course, Volpe having a fantastic spring. I know a lot of people are rooting for him, but you've got, at least a two-man race going on there. And also, I think it's kind of intriguing for Kiner-Falefa because I've been looking at him late as a steal source. We're all kind of scraping, through the queue, looking, we're short on steals. Where can we go? Is Kiner-Falefa going to play enough? Maybe in this role he does with the Bader injury, at least for the beginning of the season. So how do you see this all shaking out?
Infield and outfield are very different skills. I just remember this from Daniel Murphy back in the day. They were trying to find a place to play him in New York. And I forget who was playing second. And they wanted to see if Daniel Murphy could play the outfield, and he could not. He could not.
Do you think the fact that Kiner-Falefa caught
pretty quickly? I know. That's what I was about to say. It's like,
okay.
Of all people that maybe hasn't done it before, I kind of like, he's done everything. You know what I mean? Like I kind of think that maybe he can do it. And I think, I was looking like, okay, I was telling people on one of these podcasts, if Volpe, carries an outfield glove out to center with him, then pay attention. Because I couldn't figure out where they were getting their fourth outfielder from. I don't really like Esteban Florial, especially as a hitter. They can maybe use him as a backup center fielder and use a lot of Judge in center. So that's still on the table, I think. Mm-hmm. I don't think Rafael Ortega is that great. I don't think Cabrera is a center fielder. They just reassigned Michael Hermosillo. So, the list of options there in center are getting thin. Right now, it looks like, cobbling together Hicks and Judge. But if you can put IKF in that picture, I think he actually starts to play some, because, Hicks, Cabrera, Judge, Stanton, I think they're all corner outfielders or DHs. And so that's 4 players for 3 spots with DH, right? So basically IKF could almost get a starter's workload, or Judge plays in center some days. I would say IKF jumps to like a 4th outfielder level. That's where I would put him right now.
And I think that's enough, certainly for 15 teamers, I think, to make him relevant, get enough.
I mean, he got 531 plate appearances last year. He was a starter for a while. Mm-hmm. In Texas, he got 396, 400 plate appearances in 2018. I think something like 400, 450 maybe. And so if he gets 450, I think you're talking about like, 4 or 5 home runs and like 10, 15 stolen bases. Interesting deep league guy, because he's a guy you can move around.
Yeah, that's definitely a plus for him, to be sure. All right. Well, I'd said at the outset, we were going to talk about some spring training stats. We've talked about Stuff Plus. I think maybe you've got some. You've been dropping Stuff Plus numbers. I don't know if you've got any others left in the bag there, but we've got some, kind of more conventional surface type stats that I think are kind of interesting. I'm not convinced that all of these mean anything. But one thing, that you brought up repeatedly on these spring training episodes is who's getting a lot of playing time, who's getting a long look. And the player who's accumulated the most plate appearances so far in spring training is Michael Toglia with 47, and pretty good production with those 47 plate appearances, hitting 293. He's got a couple of homers. He has struck out 14 times. I don't think we were going to expect him to, become a contact hitter overnight or anything. It's kind of in line with what I would have expected. But do you think that this bodes well for a bigger role in Colorado?
I do have a hard time slotting him in somewhere as a starter. I do think that he's probably maybe a little bit ahead of Nolan Jones if he's getting more plate appearances than Nolan Jones.
And Nolan Jones is having a terrible spring at the plate.
Yeah, the problem is that they're talking about Ryan McMahon playing second. And oh, by the way, I think there's going to be a bold prediction about Ryan McMahon because he has hit a ball harder than he's ever hit before, and he has the hardest hit ball that's been tracked this spring. Just a little side there. But Alan Trejo is kind of like I think he's pretty much a fifth infielder type, or like a third middle infielder. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't think he's a solution at any position. So Eloheus Montero. I mean, Toglia. Can you see what positions Toglia is playing?
Because I need about a minute. So,
but I don't think he's played third before.
I don't think so either. And by the way, just
in the minors, it's been first and right, and mostly first. So, is there somebody in the outfield that, because a Blackman is kind of is listed on the Fangraphs depth chart as a DH. They've also got Mike Moustakas in camp and playing pretty well, and he would be a DH. I guess there's an outside chance that this is what's going to happen. Moustakas is the third baseman. I think this is what's going to happen. Moustakas is the third baseman, rises from the dead. Blackman plays the outfield. Grichuk and Daza play center. And Toglia and Crone split first in DH.
Well, that's interesting because I finally pulled up those positional stats. Toglia's played 10 games at first base, by far the most he's played at any
Crone
position.
Has those bad knees.
And 4 games in right, 2 games in left, 1 is DH. So
I would guess Crone is a little bit more the DH and Toglia is a little bit more the first baseman, but I think that's how they make things work. Trejo is the super utility guy all around the infield, and Daza, I think Grichuk is basically the starter in center, and Daza is the defensive replacement, fourth outfielder. It means Blackman's got to play the field. I think that's what happens.
All right. Well, let's take a look at another piece of data.
Jones goes down.
Yeah, no, I think that I could definitely see that. Look at another piece of data in terms of where players are playing. This one's not a huge surprise, but I think it's interesting. Jake Berger has played 10 games at first base for the White Sox. He has never played first base in the majors or the minors. You could see this coming because the way that the White Sox roster is structured, they don't really have any depth at first base. And this wasn't a bold prediction, but it might as well have been one, that I wrote a column where I talked about some players who I thought might be vulnerable to losing playing time. And I thought one of those might be Andrew Vaughn, because I just think he hasn't progressed as a hitter the way that I think a lot of people would have expected.
That made some people angry.
And it did. So that was the one out of all those calls that, probably more belonged in the bold predictions column.
But I mean, he was 13% better than league average last year. That's probably enough to float him. I know that the WAR was below replacement, and maybe he is slated to be maybe he's headed for DH, and that's meaningful because so is Eloy Jimenez. And part of I think why they let Jose Abreu go was they were like, we cannot have 3 DHs on one team. And so, that puts pressure on Gavin Sheets and Jake Berger to be able to play the field in order to make this team. It also means that DH is crowded. It means that Vaughn's going to have to play first base. I think that a fair amount of Vaughn's negative defensive stats were accrued in the outfield.
They were, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
the hope, I think, is he's a credible first baseman. He gets up to about 2 WAR this year, playing credible, defense. There's always the chance that he breaks out because he does hit the ball hard. He just doesn't pull his barrels. It's way too much the opposite field. That cuts off his power. If he goes and gets the ball, I think he can be a 30 homer hitter. But with his current approach, I don't think he is one. So I do think it's interesting to sort of point to him as not necessarily at all he's cracked up to be, but I do think he is the first baseman most of the time, and that means if Eloy Jimenez is the DH most of the time, then Berger is trying to be the backup infielder and Sheets is trying to be the backup outfielder. I think there's a little bit of a Berger versus Sheets thing going on.
Yeah. So the impact is definitely more for him and finding a way for him to get playing time. But then again, it needs to come at someone's expense. So I just think it's an interesting situation to
He hits
keep
the
an eye
ball
on.
hard. He barrels the ball
Oh
really
yeah.
well, and his max EV is good. And I know his strikeout rates aren't good, but in the minors they haven't been as bad. So you could expect him, if he did play, to hit 230, 240 with 25 homer type power. And so I think Jake Berger is kind of an injury away. If you just hear about an injury to Vaughn, Eloy, Sheets, even, I think he's on that roster.
All right. Let's stick on that roster. Oscar Colás, who appears to have a starting job, only one strikeout in 34 plate appearances. And so he has managed to convert that into a 364 average with a couple of home runs. So certainly making a strong case. But I think that's enough plate appearances where it's something to get kind of excited about.
Yeah, I mean the stabilization rate for strikeout rate is pretty small. Let's see if I can pull that up real quick.
So
this is from Derek Carty. It's old, and maybe it's not the same, but it says it stabilizes in 100 plate appearances.
okay, and again, I don't know that this is apples to apples comparing data that I assume is just from the regular season, but yeah, I mean he's a third of the way there. Colás, you said 100, right? 100 plate appearances.
So if you were thinking about his strikeout rate going forward, if let's say you knew his true talent strikeout rate, and let's just use his projected strikeout rate, right, as his true talent. So 27% strikeout rate would be his projection. Mm-hmm. What you would do is you would probably take a third of what he's done this spring and 2/3 of his projection. So you would move him by a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But again, that could make a big difference. I mean, if you could just imagine him
if he's 24 or
exactly.
25%, their Steamer has him at 24%. That's a 255 average with 17 to 20 homers, and that's only in 470 plate appearances. What if he just starts all the time? I mean, he's exciting. He's actually pretty exciting. There's an outside chance for a handful of steals. He's hit 300 at every spot in the minors. Of course, that comes with huge BABIPs and all that. And obviously age at level says he's not like a top prospect, because he's an A ball at 23 or whatever, 24. He's not a top prospect. And he does not really have much speed, and we'll have to see what his hit tool is like. But players like this sometimes surprise. You think about Jeff McNeil, there's a lot of people when Jeff McNeil's coming up and everyone's saying, oh, he's too old. He's not a real prospect. But there are some skills there and they can translate, and opportunity is almost more important than quality sometimes.
Yeah.
And just the opportunity is there for him.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Just to play devil's advocate too, what this reminds me a little bit of is, with the mismatch between what he's done in this initial sample versus what he's done in the minors, Colás. Last year when Anthony Santander, all he did was walk in April and thought he was, a completely different player.
And with a tiny chase rate, and chase rate's supposed to stabilize really well. And if you now go back and you look at the graphs, you can do the season. I always talk about the by game seasonal graphs for Santander. You can throw O-swing on there and you can see that he didn't chase at anything for the first 150, 100 or so plate appearances, and then he started chasing again.
So, you can point to the stabilization rate, but if he goes and then, reverts back to doing something he did before, I don't know what happened.
Especially if they have a long track record of doing something. I've learned this lesson so many times. I saw chase rate change on Paul DeJong, and I wrote a piece that actually said Paul DeJong is a superstar. And there's one guy on Twitter who comes back every 3 or 4 months just to make fun of me for that.
That is playing the long game there.
Yes, it is. I hope he comes back this year.
All right, well, let's take a look at one other hitter who's making more contact than we would have expected, and that's Reese McGuire. Also just one strikeout in 26 plate appearances. He's hitting 300 with a homer. And again, didn't want to make too much of this, but I think that's kind of an interesting situation in Boston where you have him and you have Jorge Alfaro, and my expectation has been a fairly even split in playing time. But if there's something maybe that happens in spring training that leans McGuire's way, then maybe he becomes more attractive as a second catcher.
It's amazing to me. He's in the WBC when he's fighting for a job. He's an NRI. He does not necessarily have a job. I think there was a minor league offer to Jorge Alfaro.
Oh, okay.
But
I think that's right. Yeah.
But he seems to be, and like fantasy seems to be acting like, he's got that job. I think that's because Connor Wong has options. And so the team is going to say, we can take this credible veteran for now, and Connor Wong can work on it. And if Jorge Alfaro stinks for a month or two, then we didn't invest that much, and Connor Wong can have his roster spot.
Okay.
So I think Alfaro's got at least a portion of that job. Comparing the two, I don't know, man. What do you? McGuire's going to make more contact. He already was before this, but he's not going to.
It's a low bar.
Power. Yeah.
Alfaro strikes out a lot, but he also BABIPs.
And he also hits the ball a lot harder. So, which one would you rather have? I tend to think that teams would almost rather have the catcher that could run into one. So it's possible that it's a 60-40 in Alfaro's favor, even with the strikeout rate for McGuire. But
yeah, I would certainly like to see something happen where one of them gets a larger share, because at this point it's not really helpful to either of them. And you're right, Alfaro has the higher fantasy upside because at least there's some power potential there. So yeah, we're talking second catcher impact here.
AL only.
Deep, 15 or even 15 teams, if there's 30 catchers, there's some relevance. All right. Try not to be mean. All right,
we're not doing a good job of that.
No. I'm trying to turn the tide here. All right. A few pitchers, JT Brubaker, leading all pitchers in spring training with 20 strikeouts in just 12 and a third innings and just against 3 walks. Does this mean anything?
And this is including his last start that wasn't amazing?
I believe it is, because I updated it this morning. So
I've got, with stats that include last night, I've got a 97 stuff plus, 105 location plus, 103 pitching plus. Stuff plus is more predictive, but you know what 97 is? He's 96.6, so he's just there. But 97 is basically average stuff plus for a starter. So what we're talking about with JT Brubaker right now is an average starter in Pittsburgh. That's useful.
I agree. Absolutely. So you take useful. Those strikeouts with some.
It's a little bit hard to am I going to roster him for the games I can't play him? Because I'm not necessarily going to play. Do I want to, even in St. Louis, nice park, really tough offense. Am I going to play JT Brubaker against St. Louis? Arenado and Goldschmidt. I don't know. I don't have that much confidence. But yeah, the Cubs in Pittsburgh, or the Reds in Pittsburgh, or whatever. A lot of those in Pittsburgh games, I want him. So that's where he's left. He should be higher in my rankings.
All right. Well, while
he's moving right now. I
was gonna say, while you adjust that, let's talk about Reed Detmers. I just recently wrote about him in my guys. So he's thrown a lot harder with the slider sitting 89 to 91, fastball 95 to 97. And with the increase in velocity that he had when he came back up from Salt Lake in the second half last year, just a totally different pitcher than he was earlier in the year. And to me, this is super encouraging, super exciting. And there's not that much helium yet in terms of ADP. Maybe that's going to be a short window to be able to get him.
Yeah, I moved him up, and it's gonna look weird because the model didn't really like him, but and I don't have spring training stuff numbers because he doesn't pitch in parks that have the machines. But at the same time, any slider with any depth thrown 91 miles an hour will, and it already was a top slider. I would predict right now that this slider will be, a top 10 pitch by Stuff Plus this year. So he's going to have an elite slider. And then even if his fastball shape isn't great, if he's up at 95, 97, you're thinking at least an average fastball. So now you got an average fastball and an elite slider. If he has a third pitch, it doesn't need to be good anymore. Now it just needs to be a pitch that they don't expect, And so, I think I will have been wrong on the early rankings on Detmers. I've moved him up into the top 70. And maybe I should push him harder, but I still have the fact of those sort of poor projections given his last year numbers.
All right. Matthew Boyd, also an excellent strikeout to walk ratio, 17 strikeouts against 2 walks in only 9 innings. He is still not yet inside the top 400 in ADP. I grabbed him in the very last round, reserve round in the Nerf draft this past weekend, 30th round, and I was ecstatic. I mean, you have nothing to lose at that point, and I'm excited by the form that Boyd has shown so far.
Take what I said about JT Brubaker, rinse and repeat. A little bit lower Stuff Plus numbers, but Matthew Boyd has also shown the proclivity to just throw the slider over and over and over again. And there are guys who have okay sliders by Stuff Plus that just throw a ton of sliders and do well with it. For example, Robbie Ray. And so I think that the park is even better, although they are changing the dimensions in Detroit.
That's true.
So I pause a little bit there, but I have them both at about 120 right now. And 120 is where I put useful veterans who have rotation spots that you may not want to throw every time.
All right. Well, let's just finish up here with the trio of pitchers who, in a very small sample, and I want to underline that, italicize it, bold it, very small sample, have more walks than innings. Dylan Cease, and I think he's kind of the interesting one here because he's had an issue with walks and an issue with command. 8 walks in just 6 innings. Tristan McKenzie, 7 walks in 6, and Zach Gallen also 7 walks in 6. Is there anything that you see in outside of those numbers that causes you concern?
He's had 2 game stretches where he was pretty bad with the walks last year, even when he was great. He had an 11 and 2/3, two games where he had 11 walks, in the beginning of June. And so he will have these little blips, and it's part of why he's riskier than some of the guys around him. And I'll just say that, so Stuff Plus went up on Fangraphs, and so there's been some validation that's gone around, some third-party validation, so you don't have to take my word for it anymore. There's been people playing with the stats and seeing what's predictive and what's not and all that. Tom Tango did some stuff and found that Stuff Plus beat Cameron Groves. But anyway, they're both on Fangraphs, so use mine. But what he also found was he did not find much predictive value in Location Plus. And so he's a stuffist at this point. We've got a recent conversion, a convert here in Tom Tango, who is really sort of an important figure in sabermetrics. And so was really happy to see that he did that work. And so I hew closer to Stuff Plus than ever with that validation he's done. And so Cease, I think, can stuff his way through this, where he's just going to throw nasty stuff down the middle, and he's going to be all right. Sometimes there'll be some walks. I think his team would be really well suited to give him the Tyler Glasnow treatment where he has one target. But I don't necessarily trust the White Sox to do that. Although there's Sam Mondry Cohen, who's the analytics for the Nationals, is now basically a coach with the White Sox, and so he's going to be aware of things like this. And so I could see Cease getting it together. I just love the stuff. Did you mention the other two, or did you just start with Cease?
I started with Cease, but I did mention McKenzie and Gallen.
Gallen, I actually have some spring numbers for 101 location plus for the spring. Gallen, I can't find that many starts where he's had these kind of blips, but it's also, I'm going to be more willing to write that off to just being spring. McKenzie is interesting because when he started throwing harder, so he had a little bit more command, but the velo was down. Then he went down in the minor leagues. When he came back up, he just started to throw as hard as he could, and the locations were down. So there is some interplay there with what he, with his stuff and his locations, right? I will say that I think I'd rather he threw hard. So if that's what's happening here, I would love to know his velo readings alongside that. But I would say not super worried about McKenzie, not at all worried about Gallen, and just about as worried about Cease as I was in the past.
All right, which is probably not that worried. So,
and if you want more spring stuff numbers, we do not have those on Fangraphs. You do get those as a subscriber on The Athletic. And I am writing today about spring training stuff plus surgers. And so you can look for that up on the site tomorrow. I will be chatting as well for subscribers. So all
excellent
things benefiting subscribers. I also just announced an event in New York. I think it's probably full by now. There was a real rush on the RSVPs for the panel. However, the watch party at Other Half Brewing, March 30th. The watch party is open for business for anyone. I have a beer with Other Half Brewing called Staring into the Shift. It's got an awesome label. Look for that on Twitter sometime. And a new sandwich, which is a kind of a pork knucklet, a cutlet, that we put some matbucha sauce on. It's going to be amazing. So you can come have the sandwich and have the beer and watch a little baseball with me, even if you can't make the panel portion of the evening.
All right. Well, so yeah, definitely something cool there. Check out, and also do read Eno's stuff. And with that,
pun intended.
Pun totally intended. And if you have questions for a future episode, you can email us at ratesandbarrels, spelled out, ratesandbarrels@gmail.com. You can ask in the comment section right here on YouTube if you're watching this on YouTube. In any event, for Eno Saris, I'm Al Melchior. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back on Friday